Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of The Package Tourist, hosted by yours truly, the Package Tourist, the magical mystery tour called life, Matthew DiBiase. Tonight's guest is baseball author Tom Wolfe. Tom comes from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, has published numerous essays on baseball, which were published in the Cooperstown Symposium and American Culture. He has also authored several acclaimed short stories that have been published either in the North Carolina Literary Review or in other literary forums that resulted in Tom being awarded or nominated for the Doris Betts Fiction Prize for writing fiction, or were also nominated for the Pushcart Prize. Tom Wolfe also co-authored the book Midnight Assassin, A Murder in America's Heartland, and The Plea, the true story of young Wesley Elkins with his wife Patricia Bryan. Tonight, however, we will be discussing Tom's latest release, Baseball in the Roaring Twenties, the Yankees, the Cardinals, and the captivating 1926 season. Tom, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here, and it's great to celebrate another new book release for you. So, I'd like to start off by asking you, Tom, what led you to write a book about the 1926 season?
Well, thanks for inviting me on the show. I appreciate that, and we have a shared interest in baseball and baseball history. So in terms of 1926, what drew me to 1926 really started when I was doing work on the book about the 1932 World season. That book is called The Called Shot, and The Called Shot, of course, is about the Yankees and Cubs in the 1932 World Series, Babe Ruth's called shot. And, of course, Rogers Hornsby played a role in that season also, because he was the manager of the Cubs for the first two-thirds of the season, before he was fired, actually, in the midst of a pennant race. So I had started doing research into Ruth's career and Hornsby's career for that earlier book. And it just struck me that I should kind of go back in time and find the season, which is 1926, where Hornsby and Ruth's careers really collided. And that intrigued me. That intrigued me greatly, plus the opportunity to read about and write about the decade of the 1920s, which was such a monumental and important decade, really, not only for the country, but for sports and for baseball. And it was really the launch pad for both the Yankees and Cardinals going forward into the next two decades, where they dominated their league.
Okay, Tom. Let's talk about what was the status of the Yankees when the 1926 season began. Is it, if our memory serves you correctly, weren't they recovering from a seventh place finish? Is that true?
That is definitely true. The Yankees, although they'd made it to the World Series a couple of times after Babe Ruth joined the team in 1920, 1925 was a disastrous year both for Ruth and for the Yankees. The Yankees finished seventh, as you said. And Ruth had probably his worst season. He came to spring training out of shape, ill. He was hospitalized. He missed a whole lot of games at the beginning of the season. He clashed with his manager, and he had really a terrible, terrible season in 1925. And both the Yankees and Ruth were basically written off by sports writers and felt to have no chance to be competitive in 1926.
Ooh, wow. Tom, did they make any changes with their roster when the 26 season began? If so, please tell our listeners, what were the changes?
Well, they were a young team to start with. Earl Combs was a center fielder. Lou Gehrig was in his second year. They were both young players. But the two particular and really important additions to the team came from the Pacific Coast League. Mark Koenig, who became the new Yankee shortstop, and even more importantly, Tony Lazzeri, who had been a shortstop in the minors but became the Yankees' starting second baseman. So the roster got changed by adding a little more power, but it was a very young roster, and of course, Miller Huggins, who was the manager, had to rely on Ruth, reinvigorating his career and hoping for a rebound from Ruth also. But Koenig and Lazzeri were the two main additions to the team.
Okay. Now let's talk about the Cardinals now, Tom. What was the status of the Cardinals when the 1926 season began? What were the expectations for the team when the season began?
Well, the Cardinals in 1925 had changed managers. Rogers Hornsby became the player manager at age 29, about midway in the season, and the Cardinals finished the 1925 season pretty strong. They were probably, just a few games away from actually qualifying for the World Series. So I think the Cardinals came into 1926 with very high expectations, especially because of Roger Hornsby being the manager, and he had a terrific 1925 season. He had 403, led the league in home runs with 39, had 140 some RBIs. So the Cardinals came in as a strong team, probably not as strong on paper as either the Cincinnati Reds or Pittsburgh Pirates, but and they had a few holes in the roster. They really needed another starting pitcher, and they needed probably another power hitting outfielder, which were issues they addressed during the season.
Okay. Now, by this time, 26, is it true Branch Rickey's farm system was beginning to take effect? Was it already in place, or was he still developing it? What was the status of his farm system during that season?
Yeah, the farm system of Rickey's actually began in 1920, and it certainly began to pay dividends in the next few years. And on the 1926 season, the outfielders, Ray Blades and Heine Mueller, they had both come up through the farm system. And most importantly, they had two very solid players who anchored the infield. Jim Bottomley, who was their first baseman, and Les Bell, who was the third baseman. And all four of those names that I've mentioned all came through the Rickey farm system.
Okay. Let's get back to the Yankees now. Let's talk about Miller Huggins. How did he lead the team? What was his style of management?
Well, the first thing to know about Huggins, of course, is that for 5 years he was the manager of the Cardinals from 1913 to 1917. So he was actually Rogers Hornsby's first manager, which sort of puts the 1926 World Series in perspective, that you have a former Cardinals manager managing against the current Cardinals manager. But Huggins, I would say, he exhibited a tremendous amount of patience with Babe Ruth, who was not an easy player to manage, but he was patient and also firm. And Ruth came to respect Huggins, which was really an important factor in the Yankees going forward. The other thing about Huggins was that he was a good teacher, and he had, in particular, the two players I mentioned who had been added to the team, Mark Koenig and Tony Lazzeri. They were middle infielders, which had been Huggins' position in his career, and Huggins spent most of spring training really teaching Tony Lazzeri the ins and outs of how to play second base.
Yeah, if I recall correctly in my own research, Huggins was a pretty good second baseman in his own right before he became a manager. Isn't that right, Tom?
Yeah, that's right. He had a long career with the Cincinnati Reds, and if you see pictures of him, especially pictures next to Ruth and Gehrig, you don't think of him as an athlete who could play 8 years in the major leagues as a player, but he's very small in stature. And one interesting statistic is that he had 8 career home runs, but all of them were inside the park home runs. But he had a very successful career. He was a good fielder, a very good base runner, and a very shrewd and smart player.
Now, let's get into talking about the Yankees roster. I mean, we know about Ruth. We know about Gehrig. In your opinion, who was the unsung hero of the Yankees in 1926, in your opinion?
I would have to say Tony Lazzeri. I think the expectations were fairly high for him coming from the Pacific Coast League, where he'd been a power hitter, but nobody really knew for sure if he could hit major league pitching. And he wound up being second in the American League in runs batted in, and became really a significant part of that powerful lineup, but later became known as Murderers Row. But I would say that Lazzeri was the unsung hero of the Yankees in the 1926 season.
Okay, let's get back to the Cardinals now. How did Rogers Hornsby manage the Cardinals? What was his style of leadership?
Hornsby was an irritant to most people that he worked for, to managers when he was a player and to owners when he was a manager. But he was an increasingly, or I should say, a fiercely competitive guy. Baseball was his life. and he kind of brought that attitude, and an attitude of kind of winning, that you must be committed to winning if you're going to play on my team. And I think because he had a relatively young team, his infield, not counting him, but his infield averaged 24 years, so they were young. Les Bell and Jim Bottomley, who I'd mentioned before, were just a couple of seasons into major leagues. So I think that Hornsby's style was to lead by example because he was the best right-handed hitter in baseball, but also to instill in his team a competitive spirit and a sense that they could overcome obstacles and that they could beat anybody.
Besides Rogers Hornsby, who were the key players for St. Louis in 1926?
Bottomley and Les Bell, who I mentioned, of course, were important. They had a very good catcher named Bob O'Farrell, who actually was the MVP of the National League, not for his hitting, but for the way he managed pitchers and the way that he was a defensive stalwart in the infield. The two best players for the Cardinals, the two really key players that kept them in the pennant race and then excelled in the World Series, were acquired by trades during the season. Billy Southworth, who was an outfielder, was traded from the New York Giants, and most significantly, Grover Cleveland Alexander was a pitcher who was 39 years old, suffered from epilepsy, was known to be an alcoholic. Hornsby very much wanted Alexander and got him from the Cubs in a trade that was really significant for the Cardinals for that entire year. And Alexander, then, when we get to talk about the World Series, Alexander was the pitching hero of the 1926 World Series.
Let's talk about what his old. Tell me, his old nickname was Old Pete, wasn't it?
Right. Yeah. Some people called him Alex, Pete, Old Pete. He was very well liked by players. He was very quiet Nebraskan who was not particularly dynamic or charismatic, but when he came to the Cardinals, he'd already won 330 Major League games, wound up being the third winningest pitcher in Major League history, and he was a quiet presence, but he was just an exceptional pitcher and still had life in his arm at age 39.
Let's talk about his pitching style. Was he a fastballer? Was he more of a junk man? Describe his repertoire and his pitching style. I would say two things that really distinguished him as a pitcher. He didn't have great stuff in terms of a fastball like Walter Johnson, or a terrific curveball, or a fadeaway like Christy Matheson. He relied primarily on control and an ability, I think, just to kind of psych out batters. He seemed to know what batters' weaknesses were. He was probably a more cerebral pitcher than most pitchers of that day. He understood how to pitch, and he had pitched by the time of the 1926 World Series. He pitched 4,500 innings in the major leagues, and he'd been pitching for 16 years in the majors. I think his experience and his ability to know how to pitch in difficult situations is what really made him distinctive. Tom, long time ago, I read this book written by Donald Hogan, October Heroes, and Les Bell was interviewed, and he talked about the 26th season, and he talked about Grover Cleveland Alexander, and he paid him this great compliment, because he said if Alexander had such great control, if he walked two men in a game, that meant he was wild. That's awesome, man. That is so awesome.
Yeah. He could pitch to spots, and he could identify and pitch to the spots that were the weak points for hitters, and that's maybe more important than having the fastest fastball or the best curveball.
How did Rogers Hornsby deal with Alexander's alcoholism?
That's a really interesting question. Hornsby was a teetotaler. Hornsby didn't drink, but he accepted Alexander's proclivity for alcohol, for drinking. Hornsby always trusted Alexander to be in shape to pitch when he needed him to pitch. And Alexander respected Hornsby as someone who would kind of leave him alone. I think that Alexander, when he was with the Cubs, Joe McCarthy was the manager of the Cubs at that time, felt like the manager interfered with him, kind of wanted him to do things his way. And Hornsby's way of dealing with Alexander was to let Alexander do it his way. I mean, Alexander didn't like to throw a lot of warm-up pitches. He didn't really like to run. I mean, he didn't run between games. He had his own way of preparing. He liked to smoke a cigarette before he went out on the field. And Hornsby just left him alone. I think Hornsby respected Alexander's professionalism and talent enough that he could just let Alexander be Alexander, and that worked for old Pete.
Now, you mentioned earlier Billy Southworth, outfielder Billy Southworth. What was his contribution to the team when he was acquired from the Giants?
Well, he added a bat that had a little more pop to it than the outfielders that the Cardinals had starting the season. Heine Mueller was the player who got traded for Southworth. And Southworth, fortunately for the Cardinals, had the best career of his playing career with the Cardinals in 1926. He was a good hitter. He preferred playing right field over center field. When he was with the Giants, John McGraw had him in center field. But Hornsby played him in right field. And again, maybe this is an example of Hornsby's shrewdness as a manager. He got Southworth into a position in the fielding department that Southworth was comfortable with. And he delivered many key hits, especially in August and September, as the Cardinals were making their move to the World Series.
And also, he provided a World Series experience because he had played in, I think, one or two World Series under John McGraw. Isn't that correct?
Right. Yeah, he brought some veteran experience that was lacking for the most part on the Cardinals team in 26.
I also like to add to our listeners, Billy Southworth later became one of the great managers in Major League history, one of the most underrated managers in my opinion. I mean, he literally was one of the greatest managers in Cardinals franchise history. I mean, is that correct, Tom?
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. And I mean, he had a very distinguished career because after managing, he became a scout, and he's the scout that discovered Henry Aaron.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, let's get to the World Series now. Yankees versus Cardinals. How did the World Series get started there? I mean, how did it take us through the first few games? Okay, lead us up to Game 7. Okay, Tom.
Sure. The first two games were in New York. Herb Pennock, who was the Yankees' best pitcher, pitched Game 1 against Willie Stradell, who was a small but very effective left-handed pitcher for the Cardinals. The Yankees won that 2-1 in Yankee Stadium. Then in Game 2, Hornsby could have picked really anybody to pitch that second game. He had a rested pitching staff, but he went with Grover Cleveland Alexander, who pitched an excellent game, and the Cardinals won 6-2. So the series was tied 1-1. We went to Game 3 then back in St. Louis, because they were on a 2-3-2 schedule. The Cardinals won Game 3 behind Jesse Haynes 4-0. Haynes pitched a complete game shutout, although there is an interesting kind of anecdote that goes along with Game 3. There was a rain delay, and during the rain delay, policemen came to the two dugouts, the Yankee dugout and the Cardinals dugout, with a ball that they wanted to have signed for a sick boy in New Jersey. So during the rain delay, a few Cardinals signed the ball. The policeman took the ball over to the Yankees dugout. A couple of players signed it, and then it went to Babe Ruth, who not only signed his name, but said, "I will hit a home run for you tomorrow in Game 4." So the game resumed. Cardinals wound up winning, leading the series 2-1. And then in Game 4, Ruth fulfilled his promise to the little boy, Johnny Sylvester, by hitting not one home run, but 3 home runs, as the Yankees scored 10 runs, their biggest offensive output in the entire series. That tied the series at 2 games apiece. Game 5, also in St. Louis, was another matchup between Herb Pennock and Willie Stradell. The Cardinals won that the Yankees won that 3-2 in extra innings. So the series moved to New York, back to Yankee Stadium, with the Yankees needing one more win. Game 6 was played in Yankee Stadium, and once again, it was Grover Cleveland Alexander who got the call and pitched a complete game. Cardinals won 10-2, and that sent the series to Game 7.
Okay, there's so much mythology about that Game 7 there. A lot of it involving Grover Cleveland Alexander. The question is this. The legend has it, apparently Grover Cleveland Alexander got drunk the night before, and that he was in the bullpen during Game 7. Now, based on your own research, Tom, was he drunk or badly hungover? What was his physical condition when the Game 7 took place? To tell our listeners that.
Well, I have to guess at it a little bit. I mean, there's no definitive evidence, but based on the way that Alexander lived and his interest in having a few drinks after a game, I have no doubt that after he pitched that complete game in Game 6, that he went out and had a few drinks that night. He didn't expect to pitch in Game 7. So whether or not he was hungover, I don't know. Some say that he was asleep in the bullpen as the game proceeded. He certainly didn't expect to be called upon. The game, of course, was played 3 o'clock. I think it had a 3 o'clock start. So by the time that Alexander would have been pulled into the game, then would have been brought in as he was in the 7th inning, I think he would have had time to sleep off any effects of the alcohol. And certainly Hornsby wouldn't have gone to him in that critical situation, 7th inning of the 7th game, if he didn't think Alexander was physically up to it. But as you say, that's a very discussed and argued point. It's a very kind of memorable part of baseball history. The bottom of the 7th inning, the Yankees loaded the bases. They were behind 3-2, 2 out, and Tony Lazzeri, who had a reputation for hitting in the clutch, came to bat, and that's when Hornsby removed Jesse Haynes, who was a knuckleball pitcher, but had developed a blister on his fingers and his hand was bleeding. And Hornsby decided to make a change, and he called in Pete Alexander from the bullpen. The description the players give, Les Bell, as you mentioned, talked in his interviews about his memory of that game. He talked about how Pete Alexander never seemed to walk very fast. He never seemed to be going anywhere in a hurry. So he kind of ambled in from the bullpen while Lazzeri waited at the plate. And this is, again, just to set the scene, 7th inning, Cardinals leading 3-2, 7th game of the World Series in Yankee Stadium. Alexander takes the ball. He throws 3 warm-up pitches, which is all he needed, so he couldn't have been too hungover. Lazzeri steps in, gets a fastball inside. On the second pitch, Alexander throws him another fastball, which Lazzeri hits to deep left field, curved foul at the last minute. So the count went to 2-2 at that point, and then Alexander struck Lazzeri out on a curveball. So he basically, that's the most talked about half at bat in that half inning for Lazzeri in Lazzeri's career, and a key moment in Alexander's career, really, because he really saved the Cardinals in that inning and allowed them to keep that 3-2 lead going into the 8th and 9th.
What's amazing is how it all ended in the 9th inning. I mean, tell our listeners, how did it end, that Yankee 9th inning? It ended amazingly, didn't it?
It ended amazingly in a way that no other World Series has ever ended and probably ever will end. Alexander, after he struck out Lazzeri in the 7th inning, he retired the Yankees in order in the 8th inning, and he retired the first 2 batters in the 9th inning. And then you have this monumental kind of confrontation between Alexander and the next Yankee batter, who happens to be Babe Ruth.
Ouch.
So you have Alexander against Babe Ruth, and Ruth has already hit 4 home runs in this World Series. It's a 3-2 game. It's a 1-run game. The Cardinals need 1 more out. The Yankees need 1 run to send it to extra innings or 2 runs to win it, and it's in hostile Yankee Stadium. Ruth comes up, and Alexander pitches very carefully to him, and on a 3-2 pitch, walks Ruth. So Ruth is on first. Again, 2 outs, 3-2 lead for the Cardinals. Bottom of the 9th inning, Yankee Stadium. Bob Musial steps to the plate. Lou Gehrig is on deck. On Alexander's first pitch to Musial, Ruth takes off and tries to steal second base. Bob O'Farrell throws the ball to Hornsby at second. Hornsby tags Ruth out. The game and the series is over, and the Cardinals have their first World Championship.
I know, just a heck of a way to end the thing. Ruth, of all people, trying to steal and all that. It's kind of insane and all that. But the thing was, I mean, it was St. Louis. I mean, Tom, tell me the truth. That was their first one in '26. That was their first pennant win since, was it 1888, when they were still in the American Association? Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
I mean, that was a very emotional moment for the people of St. Louis. I mean, the getting back, in competition after so long a wait. When you think about it, right, Tom?
Oh, definitely. And the city of St. Louis just had a huge celebration, and Grover Cleveland Alexander was their hero, and as he rightly should be. And of course, that's the first World Series win for the Cardinals. The Yankees had only had one also by that point, but over the next 21 seasons, from 1926 through 1946, 15 of the 21 World Series were won by either the Cardinals or the Yankees. Awesome. It was the 1926 World Series between those two teams really launched both of those teams, for the Cardinals into the Gas House gang era, and for the Yankees into the DiMaggio era.
Yeah, I mean, it also established Branch Rickey's reputation, too, as a general manager with his farm system and all of that, too. I mean, it was an affirmation for him, yeah. Tom, in your opinion, who was the Cardinals' MVP in the 1926 World Series?
Well, it has to be Grover Cleveland Alexander, but I would also just comment that Billy Southworth and Jim Bottomley each had 10 hits. Southworth had a 3-run homer in Game 2 that really won Game 2, and Jesse Haynes pitched a shutout in Game 2 and was on the verge of winning Game 7. So I mean, he pitched very, very, very well. But you got to say the Cards MVP is Grover Cleveland Alexander. 2 wins and a save. All 3 of those games that were critical were in Yankee Stadium, and he won them all on the road.
Okay. Tom, please tell our listeners, where can readers find your book?
Well, I encourage readers of all kinds of literature to visit and patronize local independent bookstores. That would be my number one recommendation. But of course, the book is available through the University of Nebraska Press by a publisher, and it's available on Amazon and other online retailers. Should be easy to find. And my earlier book, The Called Shot, is also available in all of those locations.
Tom, please tell our listeners, what is your next book project and when can we expect its release?
I haven't committed to a project at this point. Probably for the next couple of months, I'm going to stay pretty focused on publicizing baseball in the Roaring Twenties. I'm going to be at the Morristown, New Jersey Festival of the Book. I'm going to be at the Buckeye Book Fair, and I'm going to be at the Fall for the Book Festival in Virginia. So I'm going to meet readers and meet baseball fans and talk about this book. After the first of the year, I'll start thinking about what the next project is.
Do you think it'll be a solo effort in another baseball book, or do you envision another collaboration with your wife, Patricia?
That's a great question. I'll have to tell Patricia that you're asking about her. Patricia just retired after 43 years of a career as a law professor at the University of North Carolina, and I'm not sure I can drag her out of retirement to do another book. I certainly enjoyed working with her on the 2 that we did, so probably my next project will be a solo one. But I'll pass along the news to Patricia that you'd like to see her perhaps co-author another book with me.
Okay, yes. I mean, her work was. I read both of those books, Midnight Assassin and The Plea, and they were absolutely fantastic works, beautiful in every detail.
Thank you very much. Yeah, they're very, very well written, I think, and Patricia gets a lot of the credit for that.
Tom, I want you to take care. Enjoy all your success with your brand new book, and go out there and get it, ladies and gentlemen. It's up there on Amazon. Go out and buy it, because that's a great story about a great season and a lot of great players. I mean, it's one of the most immortal seasons in baseball history. So go out and get it, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Matthew. That's great.
You take care, Tom.
Okay, thanks a lot, Matthew. Appreciate it.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye now.
Stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen, for my next show where I'll be interviewing author Eric Vickery. Thank you and good night.